If you want to understand relative motion, the only two words you need to know are of and within. And once you understand this, you can improve access to motion in almost any context by applying the universal principles that we're going to cover here in this video. We'll show this on the rib cage with the guitar, and hopefully that'll be cool. And we're going to give some practical examples of how to improve relative motion within the rib cage for the motions of flexion and extension. So let's dive in. All right, so first, how do humans move? Humans move by getting from point A to point B. And the way that we do that may be by changing the shape of the body or not. And this is the difference between of and within. So if I take this shape and I move it from here, which is relatively upright, to here, which is relatively slumped, so extended to flexed, you can see that I changed my shape in order to get this point right here down to about here. Now I could still get to the same target point without having to actually change this shape at all. I can just move the whole rib cage down to meet that point. And so this is where we get within versus of. And to add one more layer, we can also see both of those things happening at the same time to different extents. Maybe I get some change within, but mostly of, or maybe I get mostly change within and not a whole lot of movement of. So of and within. Movement of the rib cage would be considered less relative motion, and movement within the rib cage would be considered more relative motion. Now, an easy way to kind of think about this, or get a sense for it, is actually by looking at how we could arrive between 2 points when playing the guitar. So imagine point A is this chord, and then point B is this chord. If I wanted to get from point A to point B with no relative motion, with no change in shape of what my left hand is doing, it might look and sound like this. Now that might be what you're going for, and in certain contexts, that could sound great. Just the same way, we don't always need more relative motion. In some contexts, we want very little. However, juxtapose that with this way of getting between those 2 points. So now this is going to be with more relative motion or changing in shape within the actual hand here. Ready? Okay, and then we could say with this hand, right now everything's moving together, not a whole lot of relative motion. What happens if we add relative motion over here at the same time? Okay, so now let's contrast that. Way one. Okay, not a whole lot of relative motion. In fact, none, right? We're just going John, 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 block, 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 block. And you would see the same thing in someone's movement. It's kind of choppy versus this, which is a little bit more smooth and variable. Right? As you can see, we got a whole lot of movement between the shapes in this hand, and we're changing shape over in this hand too. So it's not that one is better or worse, but it's going to be a different effect. And the way that I look at this in terms of movement is that achieving relative motion is as much of a skill as it is for me to go between point A and point B here while doing more shape change oriented things versus not, right? They're just two different ways of doing it. A lot of the stuff out there now, this is just me on my soapbox, is a lot of people that say you need relative motion's good, and a lack of relative motion is bad. I see where people are coming from with that, but I think this scares us and makes us think that we need some sort of arbitrary amount of range of motion test because we are equating range of motion on testing with relative motion. Okay, anyways, I'm off my soapbox. Now let's talk about a way that you can implement a 3-step process to improve relative motions within the rib cage. Number one, we are going to move towards the opposite extreme. So we're just going to point A or point B. So in this example, let's say that point A is a relatively extended position and point B is a relatively flexed position. If I'm gonna start out the opposite of one of those, I gotta choose one. So let's just say we're gonna start relatively extended here. I'm gonna then delay movement at the bottom of the rib cage. So as I'm initiating that motion, I wanna keep this still for as long as possible. And as I do this, I'm just gonna move the top of the rib cage down. So I'm delaying this, keeping this as still as possible for as long as possible, and I'm moving down from the top of the rib cage down to the bottom. It's gonna look like this. bending down, bending down, bending down, and eventually this will start going that way. But because I'm delaying it, that's gonna make it so that I get movement sequentially from top to bottom, and you're gonna see the spaces here between these bones open up. And the shape of the rib cage has now changed quite considerably. So again, 3 steps here. We're gonna choose either point A or point B. In this case, we chose point A. We're going to delay the movement at the bottom of the rib cage, and we are going to emphasize movement at the top of the rib cage. There we go. Okay, eventually, that's probably gonna come along for the ride once we've exhausted all the shape change capabilities within the rib cage. All right, now we can do just the opposite for extension, right? So if I go down into a flex state, so now I'm at point B and I'm moving back towards point A, I'm going to, again, try my best to keep this bottom part of the rib cage as still as possible, so not shifting back, as still as possible, as I just bring myself up. Now in this case, it's gonna be from this mid rib cage going all the way up to the top. And so as I'm coming up, I'm actually getting the ribs to come up and gain a little bit of space here as the sternum comes up. And eventually I might tip back the whole rib cage, but because I'm delaying this, I'm going from this position and I'm keeping this quiet from extending, I'm keeping this down as long as I can, I'm gonna get sequential extension from the mid thoracic area up through the upper thoracic area, and that's gonna maximize the shape change from flexion to extension in the rib cage itself before we get movement of the rib cage. All right, so just to recap here, if you want to improve relative motion, you're going to have point A and point B. You want to understand what shape do you need to be able to create to go from point A to point B with minimal movement of the rib cage in space and maximal movement within the rib cage. Usually the way that we're going to do this is by choosing one segment and then delaying movement at that segment while we get the other segments to move relative to it. Now in this particular video, we showed you an example of moving from the top down. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is by moving from the bottom up. And these are skills that I cover inside of my Movement Foundations programs. If you go through those programs, you will understand which movement skills you may have access to and which ones you don't. And once you understand which ones you don't, then we can start to devise a little bit of a plan around how can you actually restore relative motion. And again, this goes for any segment within the body, of and within. Leave me questions down below and we'll keep this conversation going. So peace to you and peace to relative motion.